Divesting gone wrong. Elizabeth Sullivan was addicted to white men, but white men really wanted no parts. Let Dr. Umar explain it.
Out there, unprotected.
Absolutely.
I don't date women who have had sex with non-African men.
Even if it was just an experience?
Yes.
Wow.
If a date, I can live with that. A kiss, disgusting, but I might swallow that.
Oh my God.
But if she gave that honeycomb hideout to a devil, if she gave her cookies to that Caucasian
Slayer,
I cannot go back into that cave after she let a Neanderthal enter it. I cannot do it. She has disrespected her vagina and every female ancestor we've ever had.
When Elizabeth Sullivan was reported missing in the autumn of 2014, the San Diego police suspected foul play. Over the following days and weeks, suspicions only compiled, but the evidence of what, if anything, had befallen the young mother was sparse. Friends insisted that something horrible must have happened, but her family wasn't so sure. Elizabeth Sullivan was a complicated and capable woman. It was possible that her disappearance had been by design. Maybe Elizabeth didn't want to be found. 31-year-old mother of two, Elizabeth Sullivan, was a force of nature. According to her closest friends, she was not just charismatic, fashionable, and funny. What was most striking about the young mother was her intelligence. Friends and acquaintances alike were drawn to Elizabeth because she was smart, well-read, and creative. In the autumn of 2014, Elizabeth was living in the Liberty Station neighborhood in San Diego, California. She shared a home with her husband, Matthew, and their two daughters, aged 2 and 4. The neighborhood is a former naval training center, and the home that the Sullivans rented was a spacious multi-level house. Living in California was still new for Elizabeth. She had relocated from her home state of Virginia only a few years before, after falling for husband Matthew, who was in the U.S. Navy. Matt was transferred from the large base in Norfolk, Virginia, to California only months after the two began dating. Nonetheless, Elizabeth packed up and went with him. They wed and welcomed their first daughter shortly after. Once settled in San Diego, the young mother found a new routine. Matthew's career saw him deployed for short periods of time, then sometimes much longer ones. In his absence, Elizabeth did her own thing. She made friends. She maintained an active social life. That is, until the 14th of October, when the San Diego Police Department, the SDPD, made an announcement. Elizabeth Sullivan was missing. It was Elizabeth's good friend, Nathan Character, who had notified police with concerns when he was unable to reach her. Nathan would recount later that he just had a bad feeling that something could have happened. Elizabeth had last been seen at her home the day before by her husband, Matthew, who was back in San Diego between deployments. The SDPD missing persons section found that Elizabeth's car was still at home in the garage. The family home was a bit messy, but they found nothing that overtly alarmed them or that indicated foul play. Matthew pointed out that one of the family suitcases appeared to have gone missing. Missing persons investigators also found that just the day before, Elizabeth had transferred over the full balance in her and Matthew's joint bank account, over $1,000, to her personal one. Perhaps these were signs that she had decided to leave of her own volition. Seeking insight into the life and mind of Elizabeth Sullivan, investigators pored over the 31-year-old's journals. In them, they discovered her creative flair, fictional stories of a woman swept off of her feet by a dashing Navy man, a white knight, as she called him. In her story, the knight and his love began a life in California and welcomed a beautiful baby girl. The parallels in Elizabeth's story to her own life were clear. In her fantasy, the female protagonist, disillusioned with her new life and white knight, abandons her life and starts again. Was the fantasy once again mirroring reality?
So she dreamed of being with a white man in the Navy only to abandon her first white family and attempt to start another?
Elizabeth had last sent a text message from her phone the day before, on the 13th of October. This would be the last contact she would have with her friends and family. Days later, Elizabeth Sullivan's phone was turned off. Matthew, for his part, was concerned, but not shocked by his wife's absence. It seems that amongst the quirks in Elizabeth's vibrant personality was a tendency to, on occasion, become emotionally unstable. Briefly home from deployment, her husband had just invited his mother, Michelle Sullivan, and her partner to come live with them in San Diego. Certain that his mother's help with the two kids would be gratefully received, he purchased the plane tickets and readied for their arrival. But Elizabeth was not pleased. She did not get on with her mother-in-law and was insistent that they not live under the same roof. Only a few days before Nathan reported her missing, Elizabeth, upset with her husband, had left the house and failed to return home all night. Matthew explained to the SDPD that such behavior from his wife was not uncommon. He was concerned. She had always come home in the past, but this time their argument had been a big one. Maybe this time, he thought, she had left for good. As unlikely as Matthew's explanations seemed to investigators, they had no concrete evidence that a crime had taken place. And the more that they waded into the life of Elizabeth Sullivan, the more murky the waters. Speaking with friends and family members, they learned that Elizabeth and Matthew had been mostly living two separate lives for years. After multiple long-term absences while he served in the Navy, Elizabeth had come to adopt the life and mindset of a single mother. It became more and more difficult for Matthew to integrate back into his marriage and family life when he returned back home. By autumn of 2014, friends reported that it had not been a happy marriage for some time, and they had not been married for very long. There had been accusations of domestic abuse, and police had been called out to the house on more than one occasion. To cope with these stresses, Elizabeth was known to over-medicate, and not only with her prescription drug. She also began a relationship with a man that she had met on Tinder. It was as though Elizabeth Sullivan was living two lives. At home, she was a wife struggling to hold things together, as well as a loving mother to her girls. But the other Elizabeth, the one that investigators were learning more and more about, she had a boyfriend and some dangerous habits. On October 19th, police confirmed there had been a sighting of Elizabeth reported at the soccer fields at Liberty Station, 2 days after she was reported missing. The SDPD told the media that the sighting had actually been made by two off-duty deputies. They had been at the park that morning to watch their child play soccer. And that's not all. The deputies spoke with Elizabeth directly. She appeared to them disheveled and possibly under the influence of something. Elizabeth told them that she had not been home the night before. She had also lost her phone. The deputies helped her look for it, but they were unsuccessful. After being missing for 1 full week, police confirmed yet another sighting of Elizabeth. This time, she was spotted near the San Diego International Airport.
I feel like she's in trouble, and I've come out here from Virginia to look for her, to let her know we're here. It can happen to you, and when it does, it gets very personal. And it takes on a whole new light when it happens to you, and you get a strength like you never had before, because that's my daughter. I'm bringing her home. We aren't going to let this go.
By November of 2014, 1 month after being reported missing, there had been no further sightings of Elizabeth. That month, Matthew decided to give an interview about his wife's disappearance to People magazine. He told the publication, "I'm running on fumes right now. I don't know where to look. I'm always looking around the neighborhood trying to catch a glimpse of her." He stated that, "I think about her constantly. I can't stop. The girls are my biggest concern right now. I have to keep going, try to do what I have to do for them, and keep praying." By that time, the missing persons investigative team had looked into the sighting of Elizabeth near to the airport and found it was a false report. However, they still believed the eyewitnesses who had placed her in the park. They continued to circulate her image and description to the public should there be any further sightings. SDPD investigators were also keeping tabs on the behavior of the outwardly distraught husband. While Matthew told People magazine that he was getting by with the support of the Navy community, friends of Elizabeth's noticed that that was not the only support he was receiving. Within a month of Elizabeth's disappearance, Matthew was back on the dating scene. Indeed, only months later, he moved his girlfriend into the house at Liberty Station. 10 months after she vanished, police said there was still no sign of Elizabeth Sullivan, and her case had gone cold. On October 4th, 2016, 1 week shy of the 2-year anniversary of Elizabeth's disappearance, a woman's body was found floating in the channel near Liberty Station. The San Diego County Medical Examiner confirmed that they had found Elizabeth Sullivan. Her body showed signs of sharp force trauma. In other words, Elizabeth had been stabbed to death. The case was finally handed over to the SDPD Homicide Unit to take a thorough look. On the day that Elizabeth was found, Matthew Sullivan had been packing up and moving house. He and his new girlfriend were expecting a baby, and they required more space. Despite the shocking development in Elizabeth's case, Matthew nonetheless moved forward with his plans undeterred. 3 days after she was pulled from the water, Matthew moved out of state. With the certainty that she had, in fact, been facts from the early days of the investigation began to take on new significance. Homicide detectives followed up on Elizabeth's accounts and transactions. They found that the $1,000 balance that she had moved into her personal account remained there untouched. Elizabeth had been before she had a chance to spend it. There was one transaction, however, on her credit card that stood out. That was a payment made to an attorney, a divorce attorney. The writing had been on the wall: separate bedrooms, calls to police, her stress over her mother-in-law moving in. Then, roughly a month before she went missing, Elizabeth had admitted to her husband that she was having an affair. At that point, the two began arguing over custody of the children. Matthew evidently believed that Elizabeth intended to make false accusations against him to law enforcement in order to have him arrested. She would then gain sole custody of the children. On the day Elizabeth vanished, Matthew called 911 to report his concerns.
San Diego Police, this is Melanie.
Hi, I have concerns. My wife is trying to have me, evicted or arrested from my house and take my children away from me.
Okay.
I mean, she took my personal credit card, used it to hire a lawyer against me. I haven't been served with any papers yet, but I know she's called your department earlier this morning, and I think that's where she's headed now to try to get me detained.
And she said that she took all the money out of your shared bank account?
I just checked it. It's all gone. There's nothing. Maybe 15 cents left. I'm still here with my children, and I don't know what she's doing.
If she comes back and there's some problems, or you can call us back when she's there.
Okay.
After Matthew had moved out of state, the SDPD performed yet another search of the Liberty Station home. This time, they knew what they were looking for. In the attic space above what had been Matthew's bedroom, police pulled insulation from the beams and searched in every corner and crevice. Their efforts paid off. Uncovered from that space was a military-style folding. Testing revealed blood DNA from Elizabeth Sullivan. Matthew's DNA was on the handle. This was the key piece of evidence they needed. On January 31st, 2018, Matthew Sullivan was arrested outside of his new home in Wyoming, Delaware. He was later extradited to California. As the state prepared their case, they needed to reconcile one seemingly inexplicable fact. Two medical examiners had reached conclusions regarding Elizabeth's death after she had been pulled from the water, and both experts agreed. Based on decomposition, it appeared that Elizabeth had not been deceased for 2 full years, but rather only 2 months. The state of California believed that her husband had killed her on the night of October 13th, 2014, the last day that she had been heard from by friends and family. If that was true, they needed to account for the results of the autopsy. And they did so. When the home was searched, cadaver dogs were alerted to a large freestanding freezer. It was empty, but police believed it indicated that there had been a body inside it previously. Looking back on the first search of the home, investigators recalled that the same freezer had been plugged into the power socket in the garage, next to Elizabeth's car. When they opened the freezer at that time, it had also been empty. The state now believed that Matthew had filled it. He had used it to keep Elizabeth hidden for nearly 2 years. Then, as the time approached for his move to Delaware, he finally disposed of her body, hoping she would stay hidden in the water.
It's our belief that the evidence will show the defendant that by stabbing, he then hid the body.
It's an incredible loss. They have 2 beautiful children. They have a long, storied history. And Mr. Sullivan, as I...
More than 6 years after San Diegan Elizabeth Sullivan was first reported missing, her husband is finally sentenced for murder.
Prosecutors say after stabing his wife and mother to death, the former Navy man hid her body in a freezer for 2 years before later dumping it in the San Diego Bay. News 8's Richard Allen has more on Elizabeth's loved ones' pleas for justice leading up to the judge's decision.
Well, that's right. Prosecutors say mounting financial pressures and marital difficulties led to Matthew Sullivan murdering Elizabeth, his wife, and the mother of the couple's 2 young daughters.
He didn't give her a quick, painless death. It was essentially torture.
1 year after a jury found 36-year-old Matthew Sullivan guilty of brutally stabbing his wife Elizabeth to death in their Liberty Station home, the former Navy man learns his sentence, 16 years to life in prison. Leading up to that in San Diego Superior Court Friday, Elizabeth's loved ones had their say.
The longer sentence won't make the pain go away, nor will my recanting of the sorrow I've gone through these last 6.5 years make this man feel any differently than he does now.
Matt has caused a tremendous amount of pain to me, Liz's family, and friends. There are no words to describe this pain that still sits in the pit of my heart.
Prosecutors say after his wife in October 2014, Matthew Sullivan hid her body inside a freezer in their home for 2 years, later dumping it in the San Diego Bay the day he was set to move out of San Diego. That same day, Elizabeth's decomposed body was discovered floating in the water a half-mile from the couple's home, wearing the same clothes she was last reported wearing 2 years earlier.
She should have had decades to grow old and to watch her children grow up. And the defendant took all that away from her and from them.
Matthew Sullivan's defense attorney tried in vain to argue for probation for his client, pointing out his lack of a criminal record before this.
This is the person who got through high school without discipline records of any kind, no juvenile criminal court contacts.
Arguments that in the end failed to dissuade the judge from handing down the 16 years to life sentence, as Elizabeth's loved ones pushed for the longest punishment possible.
I pray that Matt never see or experience freedom again.
And as Matthew Sullivan now begins his sentence, he is being credited with more than 3 years' time already served since his initial arrest back in 2018.
Notice how the white community still views him as an upstanding guy. The divester dreamed of a white life and her husband, while he put her to sleep for eternity so she could keep dreaming of a white life. Divesting gone wrong.